It's almost like we're not law enforcement anymore. We respond to heroin all day long.
This is Montgomery County, Ohio, now also known as the overdose capital of America. And shortly into a drive along with Deputy Teague, I began to understand why.
We just arrived on scene. They got a call about an overdose. We're in Dayton on the east side, which he said is basically ground zero for this stuff.
This is already the fourth overdose call today for the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department. Police were able to treat and save this man's life.
Yeah, you see where he blew out his vein.
His blood all over his man.
He's got blood everywhere on him. So.
It's a shocking sight, a drug overdose in a public parking lot. But for Deputy Teague, it's a familiar scene.
That was shocking to me, but for you, I mean...
Yeah, that's an everyday run-of-the-mill.
Wow.
Same old.
Trying to save lives by stopping overdoses, mostly from opioids.
Opioids are basically a class of drug that bind to any one of 3 opioid receptors in your brain and body. And so opioids generally are analgesic, meaning that they relieve pain. So there's prescription opioids like OxyContin, hydrocodone, Percocets, Vicodin, but heroin is also an opioid.
The misuse and addiction to opioids is an epidemic sweeping the country, and drug overdoses are now the leading cause of accidental death in the U.S., killing more than car crashes, guns, and even the AIDS virus. In 2016, almost 64,000 Americans died from a drug overdose. 2/3 of those were related to opioids.
Do you think this is the worst drug crisis in America?
It absolutely is.
This community here was low income, white, some mental health issues, but in the last 2 years, I know it's been just excessively attacked with heroin.
Can you explain to me what this opioid crisis is, especially here in Montgomery County?
Yeah, well, we started off with having a pill problem. I think people are suffering from unemployment or underemployment. You know, this should be our strong, working, middle-class citizen. But you know, they're depressed and they're self-medicating with heroin and fentanyl.
It started with abusing prescription opioids, which turned into heroin use, an illegal and more potent form of opioids, and then to a much stronger synthetic substance like fentanyl and even carfentanil.
Just attach just a few grains of it can kill you.
Sheriff Plummer says these new drugs are causing the number of overdoses to continue to rise.
How many overdoses are we talking per day?
Talking about 13 per day. It just keeps getting worse and worse. That's the sad thing. And when's it going to stop, you know?
But the crisis continues to grow all across the country. And in October, President Trump officially declared the opioid epidemic a national public health emergency.
We owe it to our children and to our country to do everything in our power to address this national shame and this human tragedy.
There's really not a heroin problem here, it's fentanyl.
Here on the front lines, law enforcement continues to fight around the clock.
How has your line of work now changed because of all of this?
You know, our jobs got very difficult now. It's increased tremendously. We've almost become service providers. We have to continue to fight for these people for another day to get them into treatment, to get them fixed.
Making sure all officers are trained and stocked with naloxone, also known as Narcan.
Yep, this is the miracle drug, and unfortunately we're using a lot of it.
A drug that can reverse an overdose.
Almost every department in our county uses it. You know, we're saving lives.
But keeping up with the demand is becoming more and more difficult.
This dose would maybe cure a heroin overdose?
Yeah.
1 or 2?
Yeah.
What about for fentanyl?
This may hit fentanyl, but you know, it depends on what you get. If you get a whole gel cap of fentanyl, it probably won't combat it. You're going to use several of these.
So that shows just how much stronger
Yeah.
fentanyl or carfentanil can be.
Yeah.
What's the most?
46.
46.
46 of these on one person.
A tough fight, but a battle Montgomery County isn't giving up on.
People don't understand it's a disease. It's very, very addicting. So don't try it the first time, because the first time could be your last time. So we got to come out of the shadows, and we got to accept the problem, and we got to fix the problem.
Emily Reppert, Channel 1 News. Zachary Good is a talented tattoo artist in Dayton, Ohio, but getting to this point hasn't been easy.
Just a complete sense of helplessness and despair, and not knowing what step to take next, whether it was to keep going, kill myself, or change the way I was living.
That was him just a few years ago, hooked on heroin.
You hear that term, hitting rock bottom. Was there one particular time where you really, that was it?
You know, living on the streets, homeless shelters, under bridges, in abandoned houses. I mean, it was like a long bottom for me.
It started when he was 16 years old, experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and becoming addicted to the prescription opioid Oxycontin, a storyline that's all too familiar these days as the opioid epidemic sweeps the country.
I found it from friends who'd had it from wisdom teeth surgeries or other ACL surgeries or something.
Sophomore year of high school, Shannon tore her ACL playing soccer and was prescribed Oxycontin. And soon she began misusing the prescription, continuing to take it after it was no longer needed for her injury.
They're playing for their football team or their volleyball team, and they have an accident and the doctor prescribes them opioids. Even if they're taking them as the doctor is prescribing, that can lead to an addiction. Just because a doctor prescribes them to you doesn't mean they're safe.
And although it's no surprise drug use is dangerous and can cause addiction, experts say the stakes are even higher for the teen brain.
The human brain doesn't complete development until the mid to late 20s. And the earlier you take them, the more susceptible your brain is to developing an addiction.
But how did prescription opioids meant to relieve pain become dangerous?
It started with a massive increase in the prescribing of opioids, so about a 4-fold increase over the course of about 15 years.
In the late 1990s, prescription drug companies told doctors their drugs for pain were not addictive, so doctors began prescribing them more and more. But they were addictive, and by the early 2000s, opioid overdoses were on the rise. Now, the pharmaceutical industry faces dozens of lawsuits for their role in the epidemic.
These companies put profits above the health and well-being of Ohio consumers.
In 2015, about 2 million Americans abused prescription opioids.
There are people who have an addiction to prescription opioids, and then we have people who are addicted to heroin. And about 80% of people who are addicted to heroin started with prescription opioids.
Like in movies and stuff, they always make it seem that people who do cocaine or heroin are like in their 40s or 50s and living under bridges and stuff. I mean, I was 18 at the time and like gonna go to college and like from a really good family, so I didn't think it was possible. I was very naive about it, I guess. I was until it happened.
Heroin grabbed a hold of Shannon.
Like, I didn't realize how bad it was.
And for Zachary, the drug almost cost him his life.
I spent a few months in jail, and the same day I got out, I used and overdosed in the women's bathroom at the bus hub downtown, and was taken to the hospital and was Narcaned multiple times.
Now, his mugshots serve as a reminder of a time and place he hopes to never visit again.
It was the first time I was arrested, and all of these happened within like a 3-month period.
What's it like to look at these?
It's hard to believe. That's me, and that's where I was.
Do you keep them on your phone like this for a reason though?
Yeah, and it's a reminder of what could happen if I choose. And it's also just, it's a way for me to find gratitude for where I'm at now.
Both Zachary and Shannon went to treatment facilities and are clean today, but it's a daily battle.
Society tends to think that it's hopeless, but there are 25 million Americans in stable recovery right now. It's not an easy process, but it is possible. We can help people with this by not stigmatizing drug addiction.
Now you have your own business card.
Yeah, it is.
That must make you proud.
Yeah. You know, I drive my own car, have my own place to live, I pay my bills. But yeah, life's pretty good today.
Emily Reppert, Channel 1 News.
Nick was 19 and Jack was 18, and they're both athletes, smart, outgoing kids, and best friends.
Nick and Jack Savage, two brothers from Granger, Indiana, with their whole lives ahead of them.
Nick had just finished his first year at Indiana University, and Jack had just graduated from high school, and he was heading to Ball State University in the fall.
But 2 weeks later, they attended graduation parties, becoming a night that changed their lives forever.
I asked them to be home between 12 and 12:30, and they were. Checked in with me, and then I'd gone to bed.
The next morning, Becky went to wake her son Jack, but there was no response.
I didn't know what was going on. Obviously, I checked for pulse and checked for respiration. Then I knew to call 911 first and then start CPR.
She then called for her oldest son, Nick, who was home with friends.
The boys had heard me calling in the basement, and they went to wake up Nick, and Nick was unresponsive as well.
By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late.
I remember looking at the police officer, and I said, did the paramedic just ask for a coroner? Just the look on his face just told me, this is bad, this is really bad.
Becky Savage lost two sons in one night.
These are just things that your mind just can't process it. It's so overwhelming, especially when we found out how they had passed.
The cause of death, an alcohol and oxycodone overdose.
And this is prescription opioid.
Yes.
And it's now something that has taken over this country.
Yes.
But at this time,
I have to say 2.5 years ago, it was not even on our radar. We didn't know about it, and never, ever did it cross my mind that they would have experimented with prescription drugs or that it would have taken their life.
But every day, more than 115 Americans die after overdosing on opioids. And as the epidemic continues to grow, the Savage family has made it their goal to educate others, which is why they started the 525 Foundation, named after Nick and Jack's hockey numbers.
We had all 4 boys lined up with their hockey jerseys on, and it just so happened that this is how they were standing, with the 5 and the 25. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
It's a tribute to the boys and a way to talk about the dangers of misusing opioid prescription drugs.
This picture right here was the last picture that we had taken as a family of 6.
has this been healing as a family?
I think it has been healing. I know it would be so easy to be consumed by grief. So if I take that energy and put it into something that I can make a difference on, that's kind of what we've just chosen to do. It is one of the worst feelings I've ever felt in my life.
What's usually the reaction like when you do go into schools and you speak to students?
I notice that it's very quiet. Our 2 oldest sons, Nick and Jack Savage, were pronounced dead on June 14th, 2015. The kids are really paying attention to the story because it's a real story.
It was very emotional trying to put myself in that situation and thinking about what my parents would feel.
It was like a bad dream that just did not make any sense.
This can happen to anyone, any of my classmates, my siblings. This is just a real problem that can affect anyone.
Becky has already shared her story with more than 20,000 students across the country. And although it will never bring back Nick and Jack, she hopes her message can at least help it from happening to someone else.
I just think that telling Nick and Jack's story, as horrible as it is, can ultimately save lives in the end.
Emily Reppert, Channel 1 News.